Okay. Okay, sir. I'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm moving on to the next speaker. I'll introduce him also. Dipankar Patnaik. He's a team leader, community mobilization and environmental improvements, CMEI, Ministry of Public Works and Transport, Royal Government of Cambodia. We can call him, or rather as humanitarian emergency specialist and regional development practitioner. He has been associating with Radar India as consultant emergency preparedness plan, as evaluation specialist in DEC, assessment specialist in Christian Aid during Kerala floods, then country representative, senior emergency program manager for Christian Aid in Nepal, then regional resilience officer and also as regional emergency manager South Asia, then program officer, disaster risk reduction and humanitarian assistance at Oxfam India, program officer in Leh flood response in 2010 in Oxfam. And his list goes like that. So I take immense pleasure to welcome you also to this webinar, Dipankar.
Thanks, Jyoti. Thank you.
Okay. Sir, I think now you can take over the session, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good morning to all of you who are attending this webinar. I'm extremely delighted to be part of this panel with my very good friend, Dr. Dipankar Patnaik, with whom I work very closely in many assignments. I feel that actually, with the Nirmala College Geography Department and with all the academics, practitioners from both Tamil Nadu and many other parts of the country who are actually signing in to this webinar, I feel that there will be an opportunity for all of us to have a good interaction on this topic, which is disaster management in times of COVID-19. So I will basically try and make share the screen of a very brief presentation which will show some highlights. I hope that Dr. Jyotirmay, if you can give me the approval to share the screen, then I will share the screen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I've given.
Yeah. Okay. Are you able to see this?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's visible.
Okay. This disaster management in times of COVID-19 is actually an extremely relevant topic, very contemporary, and it's all the more relevant now because we've just seen the cyclone Amphan hitting West Bengal, especially in the Sundarbans, in the region which was devastated by the cyclone Ayla in 2009, 11 years ago. And we have seen the impact of that in Orissa in several districts and also in West Bengal and in the Sundarbans. And we will also be seeing the impact of that in many other parts of the continent, including Bangladesh and Bhutan. Now, this presentation, actually, I will be covering the aspects related to disaster management in times of COVID in 7 brief sections. The first one basically tries to cover and provide an overview of disaster management. And the second part will be touching on the global, national, and state highlights of the COVID-19 disease outbreak. The third section will briefly look at the role of governance institutions in the country. Then the critical gaps in preparedness and emergency response. And we will also be looking at the impact of the lockdown on migrant workers and vulnerable sections because the lockdown was announced with very short notice of 4 hours on the 24th of March. And we will be also looking at containing the COVID-19 disease outbreak. And finally, I'll touch upon briefly the road ahead in terms of the need to be prepared for emerging threats and shocks. Now, if you look at the disaster management, various phases of disaster management, you can see the disaster management as a cycle with two parts. It's a circle with two parts. The upper part is the pre-disaster phase, and the lower part is the post-disaster phase. And the pre-disaster phase in the upper part consists of two major, processes, which are the preparedness and the prevention. Prevention is also called mitigation. It's very easy to remember this as two P's in the pre-disaster phase. And in the post-disaster phase, we have three R's: response, rehabilitation, and recovery. So two P's in the pre-disaster phase, preparedness and prevention, and three R's in the post-disaster phase, which is a response, rehabilitation, and recovery. This is broadly the way in which we would look at every disaster typology. And, you find that most of the advanced countries are very strong on the upper half, which is the pre-disaster phase, with preparedness and prevention being very strong. And so when a disaster strikes in those countries, we see that emergency response happens almost seamlessly. And rehabilitation and recovery happens without actually, overwhelming the whole country. Whereas in most of the developing countries, because the preparedness and prevention is very weak, we find that emergency response is very badly compromised. If you look at the COVID-19 disease outbreak, this is the most devastating disaster in the 21st century, because as we are talking, we find that the number of people who are affected by the disaster, in terms of the people who have been tested, is more than 500 million. Now, this is actually more than 50 lakh people affected, diagnosed to be positive, is only the tip of the iceberg, because there are many, many, many more people who are affected by the COVID infection, but at the same time, they've not been tested, and so we do not know. And in terms of the deaths, the number has crossed more than 300,000, 3 lakh people. And this is very, very significant, because if you recall some of the mega disasters which have happened in the world in the last few decades, you remember that it was the cyclone which happened, in Cyclone Nargis in Myanmar, which killed more than 300,000 people. You've had the Indian Ocean tsunami, which killed more than 300,000 people in 14 countries. We've had the Haiti earthquake in 2010, which killed more than 300,000 people. Now, this COVID outbreak has actually covered more than, and has actually caused the deaths of more than 330,000 people in different countries around the world. And 86% of the people have recovered globally, and the number of active cases is more than 27 lakh people. And the countries affected is 215, which means a large number of countries, almost every country in the world, has been impacted by this coronavirus outbreak. If you look at India, you find that the number of coronavirus cases is more than 1 lakh, and I think the number must have crossed again today. We had more than 3,438 deaths as of yesterday, and today the number may be about 3,800. 45,000 people recovered, active cases 63,000 people, and the number of states and union territories affected 34, except Lakshadweep and Sikkim. Now, this I think is extremely important, because these are tested and confirmed coronavirus cases. More than 1 lakh, cases which have been diagnosed to be positive. And if you actually look at many more people who are actually affected, we would, when the testing becomes conducted in different parts of the country, we will actually find that the number is much more. And in Kerala, we have the total number of people infected is 666, deaths 3, today it's 4, because there was a death which happened yesterday, and more than 562 people have recovered out of 666. So we have 161 active cases in Kerala. And this is, I think, also is because a large number of people who are returning from overseas through the Vande Bharat evacuation missions from different countries, especially from the Middle East, and also from the UK, the US, and many other countries, including Italy. There are many good practice examples of effective response, and Kerala actually, as I mentioned earlier, we've had the cases. The first case was reported in Kerala on the 30th of January, and Kerala actually started preparing for this even when the first cases started getting reported in Wuhan, in China. And the first case was just reported in Kerala was actually a student from Kerala who was returning from Wuhan. And the next two cases, which happened on the 2nd of February, were also from Wuhan. And so the Chinese students, the Indian students from Wuhan brought the disease to India. And then we saw this outbreak happening. And then Kerala actually started also preparing with what you see on the right side. You see the COVID Whisk. Whisk is a walk-in screening kiosk where the responder, the lab technician or the doctor or the paramedic sits within the glass chamber behind the glass screen, and using this rubber gloves, the person is actually able to take the sample of the COVID, suspected person, and then the person is actually able to do the testing without actually having a physical contact with the patient. So I think this has been one of the good practices which is done after what was done in South Korea, and now it is also available in different parts of Tamil Nadu, in Telangana, in Karnataka, and in Maharashtra, and in many other parts of the country. So these are some of the good practice examples of doing that. And then Kerala also did the tracking of the COVID positive cases, and then finding the route map, finding who were the positive contacts and primary contacts as well as secondary contacts who were in touch with the COVID-19 affected person. And then we were also able to really see that with the help of the health system and the local police and various other Panchayati Raj functionaries, the people who were returning were actually tracked very carefully, and they were able to also see that this is contained. Now, in terms of the role of governance institutions, most of you are familiar with the National Disaster Management Authority, headed by the Prime Minister of the country. And the National Disaster Management Authority was constituted in 2005. And I was one of the founder members. I'm one of the founder members of the NDMA from 2005 to 2010. And I worked very closely with the civil society organizations. And before that, I was with the UN. And I had coordinated the tsunami response in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and Pondicherry, as well as Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So we have a National Crisis Management Committee headed by the Cabinet Secretary, and the National Executive Committee of the NDMA headed by the Home Secretary, Government of India. And we have the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, which is responsible for the coordination of the institutions and also for looking at the testing as well as getting the testing kits and various other modalities, PPEs and various other response support systems. And then we have the state disaster management authorities headed by the state chief ministers and the lieutenant governors in the union territories. We have the state executive committees headed by the state chief secretaries, and the district disaster management authorities headed by the district collectors. And then we have the National Disaster Response Force, constituted from the people who are deputed from the paramilitary forces like the ITBP, the CISF, the CRPF, the BSF, and Rashtriya Rifles, and so on. And we have the State Disaster Response Force from the local police, from the various state governments. Then in terms of the institutions which are representing the specific nodal agencies, we have the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, the Ministry of External Affairs, basically coordinating with all the Indian missions abroad and with the Indian nationals in many countries affected by the COVID-19. We have the Ministry of Civil Aviation facilitating the evacuation of people from the affected countries. We have the Ministry of Finance making many announcements in terms of various packages to support the people affected. We have the MOD, the Ministry of Defense, allowing the transport aircrafts, cargo aircrafts of the Indian Air Force, as well as passenger aircrafts, evacuating people. And the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting conducting the press conferences, the Press Information Bureau, and various other agencies. The Ministry of Company Affairs looking at small-scale agencies, small-scale industries, MSMEs, and so on. So these are some of the agencies which are working along with the state governments. But we find that actually the role of governance institutions in this case of COVID response has been very, very complex and very challenging. And in terms of the critical gaps in preparedness and emergency response, we had a countrywide lockdown for 3 weeks initially, with a 4-hour notice, which was announced on the 24th of March. And this, I think, has created a tremendous amount of inconvenience to people, especially because the trains were suspended, buses and all private transport was actually cancelled and not allowed to travel, not allowed to move. And so we've seen a lot of migrant workers, interstate migrant workers, traveling hundreds and thousands of kilometers. And we also had the unfortunate and tragic deaths of many of these migrant workers on the railway tracks when a goods train went over and crushed some of them, 16 of them in Aurangabad, in Maharashtra, and also people getting run over on the roads, then people having accidents, trucks colliding with each other, overloading of transport, and so on. And we also had this problem about inadequate access to testing kits and the complaints about the lack of sensitivity in terms of accuracy in the testing from these testing kits, the inadequate access to personal protective equipment, the N95 masks for the doctors and the ICUs and the COVID-19 COVID-19 wards, gloves, ICU beds, ventilators. And this, I think, has been also something which really exposed the failure of the public health facility, and especially the outreach in many parts of the country. And we also had the problems about the flip-flop of instructions issued by the nodal agencies. Initially, many of you may be aware that the Ministry of Home Affairs requested the state governments to arrange buses for the travel of migrants without taking into consideration that the numbers were in several lakhs and maybe even crores. The request for rapid testing, and initially it was announced that they will be doing the rapid testing, then pool testing, then RT-PCR testing, and the changing of the testing frequency, initially 1 day and then twice to be confirmed negative, and now instructions to discharge patients without testing when they show signs of improvement, the Arogya Setu app, and the issues related to the privacy and so on, and the testing of the people for the travel of migrants. And also now that the testing is not required even for the travel of migrants, and opening up of the country in such an uncertain times when we find that the number of COVID-19 infections is spreading, because we find that actually, if you really look at the number of positive cases and deaths, when the announcement was made about the lockdown and the way in which we see the number of cases, initially it was only 519 new cases when the lockdown was announced, and only 9 deaths. But then we had the first lockdown, we saw 9,844 people with 330 deaths, and in the second lockdown it was 967 deaths. But now we have more than 3,500 plus, I think. Now, these are some of the issues actually that we find that we would need to basically recognize that the inadequate preparedness for announcing the lockdown. In fact, the lockdown should have actually helped with at least 72 hours or 96 hours notice, where people could have actually then been allowed to travel and reach their destinations when they felt more secure and safe. And we would have also been able to use that time for ramping up the preparedness. Like we see in Maharashtra, for instance, stadiums being converted into COVID wards, new COVID clinics being opened, and so on. We would have needed more and more ICU wards, more ICU beds, more facilities, more COVID hospitals, more testing facilities, and so on. All this could have been done with advanced planning and with sufficient preparedness to be strengthened. Now, in terms of the migrant workers, the way in which migrant workers have moved, there is a report recently, it just come out just 3 days ago, with the Standard Workers Action Network, which said a report which has the title 32 Days and Counting, COVID-19 Lockdown, Migrant Workers and the Inadequacy of Welfare Measures in India. And we also have, the clusters of migrant workers traveling. We can actually see that here. Each dot is actually, each pixel is 100 to 500 workers. So you can imagine the number of people who have traveled, and then, you've seen the people whose feet have been, cut. They were walking in the heat, without footwear many times, and, walking hundreds and thousands of miles. Now, this, I think, has been very tragic. This has been extremely difficult with elderly people, with children, with all their belongings. This probably reminded many people of the way in which people actually, during the partition, the way in which people had to travel across India and Pakistan to basically save themselves. In terms of the impact of lockdown on migrant workers and vulnerable sections, you would actually see a demographic divide which is happening. You will also see huge demographic shifts happening. And interstate migrant workers will also have to recognize that the distinction between what is earlier called the home state and the host state is actually going to become very blurred. And we will actually have to look at employment opportunities and diversification for the people who are actually back in the home states with their villages, because they have been treated very badly by the system, by the states, and by the stakeholder groups, and by many, many people. Now, I think this has been something which they've seen, that the system has been very insensitive to the plight of the migrant workers. Now, in terms of the way in which we compare ourselves, we find that India compares in terms of the numbers. You will actually see that, the numbers seem to be much better compared to the rest of the world in terms of the number of cases per 100,000 people. In India is actually single digits, but so is China. But this should not give us any feeling of comfort or satisfaction, because India is a country with more than 138 crore people, and so we really do not know. There are several unknowns in this. There are false negatives, there are false positives, there are problems where we have not been able to reach out to the people who are infected. Many people are not coming out and explaining that they have these symptoms. There are issues about immunocompromised people. There are problems about people with comorbidities. And many COVID-19 cases are not shown as COVID-19 deaths. They've been reported as deaths due to either pneumonia or due to cardiac failure, heart attacks, and so on. Whereas actually, I think we would need to really question ourselves as to whether we are really addressing this problem correctly. And I would also like to mention that we had, in the last 7 to 8 weeks, we have had more than 500,000 deaths in the country, which are non-COVID-19 deaths. And we really do not know whether some of them are actually also COVID-19 deaths. So we would need to also look at the real numbers of the people. The numbers may not be that high. We only have 3,000 plus deaths in COVID-19, but out of the 500,000 people who died, in the last 7 to 8 weeks, we may also have a few people who have been COVID-19 deaths. So we need to also understand and really look at pinpointing the exposure, the risk of exposure and risk of infection. In terms of containing the COVID-19 disease outbreak, the WHO had said test, test, test. Now, we also know that there is this person called Larry Brilliant, who kept repeating early detection and early response. And Larry Brilliant has written a book which is called Sometimes Brilliant, The Impossible Adventure of, The Impossible Adventure of a Spiritual Seeker who helped to conquer the worst disease in history. This is a book published in the last slide. COVID-19 is just the tip of the iceberg. A biological disaster like COVID-19 could be a bioterror or a bioerror. And I think, we have many questions about the source of the outbreak, whether it was the Wuhan lab, whether it was actually a deliberate attempt of looking at a vaccine or a virus, whether it will challenge the public health emergency response capacities in all countries, because 215 countries have been affected. There has been massive impact in terms of the collapse of the economies in many parts of the world, in many countries. We must be prepared for several such threats and shocks. There will be many, many waves of COVID-19, and we are only seeing that with the travel of interstate migrant workers, they say that 1 out of every 4 persons who came in from Mumbai, from Delhi to Bihar, are COVID-19 positive. And Karnataka has sealed the borders for the people who are traveling in from Maharashtra and Gujarat, because they found that 55.75% of the people who were coming into Karnataka from Maharashtra were COVID positive. And all of us have to strengthen our immunity. And this is one of the biggest messages of the COVID-19 outbreak. People who are immunocompromised and people with comorbidities have to be extremely careful. And the most important last message is that the cyclone Umpan hitting the COVID-19 affected Odisha and West Bengal will challenge the response agencies again during the coming flood season, starting from the next month. From June onwards, we will be seeing July to September, June, July, August, September. We'll be having the flood season in many parts of the country, and we will have to be extremely careful. I stop here. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And I'm extremely grateful to all of you, and I look forward to interaction with all of you in terms of the questions and the messages. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for a wonderful session. You have given an overview of how it started and how it went about. And I think now we can open the session for questions. If the participants have something to clarify with the speaker, you can ask now. One by one at a time, you can start asking the question.
Can we have Dr. Dipankar's presentation also, and then
finally? Okay.
Questions? Yeah.
Okay, sir. Yeah. Fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, if there are any questions or comments, you can also put it in the chat box, and I will keep noting it down, and then we can open it up for discussions after Dr. Dipankar's presentation is over. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Participants can kindly note that you can give your questions in the chat box also. He will be checking on that and will be answering to the end of this session. So now I welcome you, Dipankar. You can start your session. Welcome.
Hello. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how to share my screen.
Yeah, I'll give you the permission. Okay.
Okay.
Are you able to share?
No. Trying to figure out where. Share screen. Okay. Okay. Oh yeah, share screen. Okay. Okay, is it visible now? Is the screen visible?
Yeah, almost it is. Yes.
Okay, so very good morning to all of you, and thanks Dr. Jyotirmay for giving me this opportunity, and thanks Professor Menon also for very graciously accepting this request to be part of this webinar. I think, sir, what you have shown is a very detailed and a very comprehensive PowerPoint presentation of the situation that's battling, kind of harassing all of us. I hope my presentation will add some value to that, increasing level of knowledge base that's being created around. So how I have scheduled this whole presentation is to take a bird's eye view about what's happening and what could be the potential pathways for one as Indians, also for people who are from the poor and developing countries, as well as for the academics in some ways. So it's a very macro level kind of a presentation, but it does open pathways which we can hope that students and faculty will take up in the days to come. So I'll start here. So I think what's important for us to understand is that disasters are all around us. I'm sure these photos, this photo is quite reminiscent, and it's from the Cochin airport, from the floods that had affected Kerala. And this photo is from the day before, from Cyclone Amphan from Kolkata. I think the stark reality is hitting at us that while we are using this time to talk about a global pandemic called COVID, we also need to understand that there will be systematic onslaught of regular disasters which are continuously going to affect us, as they always have. And to all this, there is also this new kind of a pandemic which is going to be harassing us again and again. So we need to keep that in perspective, that disasters are around us. They're happening in every moment as we speak in some part of the world, and more so in the coming days we will see more of these disasters or events coming closer home. So I think what we need to also understand is that we will become party to a design where disasters will become an everyday part of life. It's very pessimistic and very fatalist in some ways. But I think what we need to understand is that this is the way of the future, and we need to adapt and act alongside with these events that are going to affect us. So just for a brief understanding about what a disaster is, what's important is for all of us to focus is on the red ones that I've highlighted. It's a disruption to normal patterns of life. It's usually severe and may also be sudden, unexpected, and widespread. And it causes loss of life, injury, hardship, and adverse health effect on health. What it also does is it creates and has an impact on destruction and damage to government systems, buildings, communications, and essential services. All the things that create our ecosystem are kind of affected and hindered. And in this time, the community needs shelter, food, clothing, medical assistance, and social care. So this is the larger ambit of disaster management, which we need to factor, like what is a disaster and how does it affect us. What we also need to understand is that this disaster is being managed in a cycle called disaster management cycle, which a lot of academics and disaster management professionals have been using, and Menon sir had also spoken about it. So what the students and faculty of this webinar need to focus on is that there are 4 pillars to this disaster management cycle. This is preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. I'll just quickly rush through this, but it's also a cyclical one. So depending on the way you want to see it, but the graphic, which is the circular diagram, is more detailed because it shows the pathways that take place after a disaster, which starts with response, leads to recovery, then goes to mitigation, and then also has a preparedness element which helps us to prepare for the next big one. Similarly, the concentric circles are also outside, which also talk about search and rescue and relief. There's reconstruction, rehabilitation, there's prevention and early warning. A lot of things are happening today in early warning, and as students of geography and GIS, there's a lot of wealth of information that is being generated, and there's a lot of opportunity that's coming for students in the future in these sectors. But what we need to remember here is that the occurrence of an event may produce a disaster. An event that results in large number of casualties or mass casualties may or may not constitute a disaster. Now, this is paradoxical in some ways, but we need to understand that a localized event can cause a lot of lives being lost, but then we don't have to actually consider them as disasters itself. Of course, there is a global website called TREAD and an institution that considers that any event that affects more than 4 people is also considered as an emergency. But what we need to understand is that in India or in the developing world, we consider disasters to be affecting a large number of people only when the disaster is so big that the local mechanisms for responses become overwhelmed. So your local in-house capacity or the capacity that is available in your village or your block or in your district or in your state, in other countries like where I am right now in Cambodia, we call it province. So in different places, there are different administrative units which are duty bound through the concept of a welfare state to be responsible to give to the demands of the people, the needs of the people, more so in times of disasters. But when conditions arise that those local capacities, local mechanisms are overwhelmed, that's when a disaster becomes a really big one. And that's when outside assistance is required. Now, coming to this issue of COVID-19, which is the novel coronavirus 2, we need to understand that it's now a global pandemic. At least sitting where I am, I knew about this somewhere in end of January, and I've spoken to Menon sir also on this. I've spoken to most of my friends and family in India about how this disaster was, coming to us, and because Cambodia is very well linked to China, we could see the repercussions of the virus affecting us very, very, much faster than what people in India could actually anticipate. Because most of the people who went back during the Lunar New Year, they never came back, and a large number of properties and business establishments are owned by Chinese. So when we saw that the Chinese are not coming back, threat perceptions were increased. People started to act, a little more cautious, and the government of Cambodia also started acting in a very, cautious manner. So masks came out, and sanitizers were available everywhere. Things that we saw in India happening in April, believe me, we were doing it from February. So I think it's also a reflex mechanism. It's also a response capacity that actually comes from two sides. One is the state, which actually responds to the disaster. The other is our inherent capacity as individuals who are afraid, who are scared, who are cautious, who are caring about their own people, their loved ones. And that's where the action actually starts. So that reflex is very essential. I think somewhere from what we have seen in our country about the migrants issues, or the way the lockdowns were declared, or the way the people have been, kind of subverting rules and procedures and trying to act alongside with some nefarious intent of not following the lockdown. That also brings out the inherent, how would I say, it's not a virtue in any manner to say that we are, inherently not very law-abiding. And I think that is something that we need to question. And once we start questioning ourselves, I think there will come a time where we start questioning as a community, because these actions actually increase the vulnerability, and these vulnerabilities lead to distress. And that photo is self-explanatory. And I think the biggest disaster that we are seeing apart from the COVID pandemic in the country is this, large number of people, almost 8 to 10 crore of people with no recourse, no choice, no, kind of way forward. They are walking. And I think it's just becomes so futile in many ways that we see a lot of people just, switching channels to go to something which is more, entertaining and which is more alluring. So I think this entire, tendency to not respond to something which is obviously in front of us and not acting on it is going to hurt us badly. I think one we need to understand is that disaster risks around us further compounded by increasing vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities are because of changing demographics, socioeconomic conditions, unplanned urbanization, development within high-risk zones, environmental degradation, climate change, geological hazards, epidemics, and pandemics. What's important for Indians and all of us now is to understand that if we just look around, where are the hotspots of coronavirus? These are in highly densely packed urban settlements, and these did not come up in the last 2 days. Bombay has been one of the most, densely packed urban settlements in the world for as long as we know. Chennai is also a big urban agglomeration. In urban geography, we have been seeing this, how, planning settlements and, transport systems are very essential. Now, for long, we have not bothered about these things. And these are the inherent flaws which are actually coming out to the fore, which is being exposed and, how would I say, it's being exploited by the COVID pandemic in a major way. Add to that our generic, thought process of not following rules and regulations and always assuming that the other person would be doing what is required. So I think that's where I need to again and again hammer the idea that we need to understand that this would create a situation where the disasters will seriously threaten a country's economy, its population, and its sustainable development. We need to not lose sight of the fact that COVID is not going to hurt us only on a physical or on a health basis. It is going to affect the very ways of our life. We need to understand that COVID-19 is possibly the most unprecedented disaster event of our time, not because it was unprecedented because of its occurrence. It was also unprecedented because of our lack of preparedness. I think that's very essential for what we need to understand. I think we also need to understand that the effects of COVID-19 are slowly coming about, but and a lot of us are already seeing TV, news, media, and journals and articles. But what we need to understand is to just focus on these communities. This is basically because I work in the civil society sector. I've worked in the development sector. Now I work with the government. I think where I try to consciously or always try to push for the idea is that students, my friends, family, everybody needs to understand that there is a world outside and we need to empathize with them. We need to be more and more concerned about what's happening around us, because they are the people, they are the infrastructure. There are people, infrastructure, there are other things which actually co-create our ecosystem within which we stay in. So just to bring your attention to the slides, I think what we also need to understand is that there are a lot of pregnant women out there who are COVID-free, but they need access to sustained healthcare. There are a lot of lactating mothers who need access to nutritional package. In Cambodia, we are seeing this major issue where COVID is not there at all. There's only one case, but there are a lot of pregnant and lactating women who are not able to access the health facilities because the health facilities are largely focused on COVID. That's the same situation that I hear in Chennai, I hear in my home state of Bhubaneswar, I get that from Delhi, Pune, Bombay, everywhere. So those are the things what we need to understand. There are a lot of health workers, there are law and order professionals who are like police and others who are going into contact tracing actions. They are vulnerable themselves and their families in turn are further vulnerable. The infrastructure that we need also to worry about is the medical facilities, because we need to understand that there are a lot of hospital dispensaries, public health posts, which are not directed or geared towards a COVID response. And they need to remain available for the non-COVID needs. So that's what is something that we need to understand, and the government and all of us need to co-create with that. Transport systems, you heard the flights being open from today. I think it's also important that these flights need to go beyond just the metros, and there has to be multimodal transport systems which are available for these people who are traveling on aircrafts from, say, Delhi to Chennai, and then from Chennai to Erode to wherever, if they have to go to Poli Hills or somewhere. They need to understand that those remote areas also need an equal and unhindered access. Again, banking institutions, the access to liquidity, that is something that the government is talking a lot about. We heard about huge packages, but what we need to understand is that the common man or the common human on the ground needs that to be unpacked. They need to have liquidity in their hands, so that there is, although a huge amount of push from the government to create a supply, but we also need to understand that there has to be an inherent demand to accept that kind of supply. And that supply, that demand needs to be coming from a liquidity which is available at people's hands. Of course, there is a lot of work that needs to be done on psychosocial care. What I'm going to talk about is not going to be very parliamentary in many ways, because I feel that we are getting into a point where there is a stigma of being affected. There is a stigma of attached to the family of the affected. There is also a stigma of people who are returnees. They are from foreign. Initially, in the first 2 months, we saw a lot of stigma being attached to people who had come from overseas, as if like they were the genuine carriers. And then now that stigma has gotten down to domestic travelers, it has gotten down to migrants, and somewhere along the process, the very nature of our country or the way we have lived life is coming under question, whether it's the question about the union, what's the center's role, what's the state's role, what's the federal model, where do these lines blur around. And then there is this ghettoization, which I'm very concerned about, that people need to understand, and this is going to have a long-term impact on who we live and how we live. I think the key challenges, in my opinion, to effective disaster management, which affects our response capacity and reach, includes the following. There are many more, but I thought like this would make sense for the webinar. The movement of resources supports medical equipment, food aid. People are in need of food in the remote areas. There are also a large urban populace which needs access to non-essential lifestyle goods. For an example, if somebody's phone is cracked, it's not working, and if they are dependent on an online delivery system, so what happens to them in a containment zone? So I think we need to understand that there will be much more newfound needs, which traditionally disaster management practitioners or the government per se has not been responding. So it's always been roti kapda and makan, and then food, shelter, and clothing kind of an issues. But what we need to understand is that the urban India or the youth of the country, which is possibly one of the largest youth communities in the world, is very aspirational. It's demanding, and its needs are increasing. Those needs are way beyond what the government has traditionally catered to. So we need to understand, when you try to lock down a whole country, a huge economy which is running on full steams, we need to understand that there will be fissures, there will be demands which you need to cater to, because that's what your basic mandate is. So access and containment zones, we need to understand that there are non-COVID medical needs. My parents have struggled in the initial part of the COVID lockdown, where their regular medicine for blood pressure, for diabetes and others were not available. And there were also cases of small fire, short circuit, where people had immediate need for sudden emergencies, and there were no ambulances available. Again, a lot of youth who are kind of transitioning between urban areas, students who study in Kerala, maybe going to Bombay to work, students from Delhi maybe coming to South to study. They are all dependent on food delivery systems. I think that something has come out in a major manner. I'm not saying that these are all flaws, but these are traditional learnings being questioned, and we need to understand that the way of the future would need some sort of a response designed to factor these emerging needs of a growing urban youth in the country, as well as a growing aged population. Because as we grow in terms of medical science and standard of living increases, we'll have a large number of aged population which needs special attention, just like in Japan. And then there is a need for access to entertainment and community engagement. When I say entertainment, I'm not saying malls and theaters, but there is a need to unwind. Believe me, we have been in a lockdown mode for almost 3 months now, and I can tell you that kids need space for unwinding. And of course, there is one thing that I didn't make red, but is the management of fake news. There's so much of fake news around us. I think disaster management needs to also factor on this. Menon sir is here. I think the DM Act does talk about information sharing, accountability to affected populations. But I think growingly what we are seeing is that this level of fake news that is being propagated either to look at a particular community or to propagate a particular medicine, like the president of a big country is talking about, these kind of informations need to be managed somehow, so that access to ethical and proper means of education are maintained. And also we need to understand that in the non-containment zones, people need to be rational in thinking what actually is a need, because the whole country is facing an unprecedented event. Just to travel for fun or just to travel to meet somebody can also be avoided. So there is some sort of a rational impetus that is required at the self level. Of course, we need to also start thinking about the world beyond COVID-19, because this is an event which has affected us for the last 2 months or 3 months per se, but then it is somehow as if like it has been there forever. So we are always talking about this, but what we need to understand is that beyond COVID, there are a lot of development ills or issues that we need to focus about. There have always been around us, where it's talking about employment, the well-being of our people, community cohesiveness that we are struggling with all around us, waste management, climate change, annual disaster cycle. You saw Cyclone Amphan, kind of challenging Orissa and then hitting Bangladesh. It has moved on to Cox's Bazar, where there's a huge Rohingya population which is struggling with. And then basically the investment in hope. I think that's something that we need to factor about, that there will be a world beyond COVID-19. And the entire effort of this webinar or our actions is to maintain that we move towards that world which is beyond COVID-19. And I think something which is very important for us as disaster management practitioners or as common individuals is to understand that there is a need for empathy and care. I'll just quickly rush through this. I think what we also need to understand is that we are relying on the fact that aged children and people with comorbidities and pre-existing ailments are very vulnerable to COVID-19, and their impacts are being felt by all. But what I would like to just question you in this webinar is to also think about the rural poor, because a lot of us are actually sitting and listening to this on a device or a platform using a data which is available to us, for which we are able to pay. But there is a huge amount of India, or a huge amount of rural population which has low literacy, which has minimal access to healthcare, which is disabled, which has lost employment, having a hindered flow of cash, information, and access to their loved ones. Because a lot of people who are earning for them are not actually with them in this moment of crisis and need, and they have gone there in search of money so that these people over here have a better lifestyle. But eventually what has happened is, because of COVID being a pandemic, a lot of people are stuck in different places, and the access to information, access to cash is mismanaged. So they are struggling. What we need to understand is that they are continually trying to navigate daily life, also trying to avoid getting sick. So we need to empathize, and we need to be a little more caring than we are, and that care needs to be shown in our technique, our education, what we want to do in our life, what we want to do in our daily lives. What would I also like to talk about is that the hardship is spreading. We know this. What happens if communities are stuck with another disaster? That is something that Cyclone Amphan kind of directly showed us and kind of challenged us. It could be a flood, it could be a communal riot, it could be a cyclone, it could be an earthquake. Be vigilant and be ready for this. I think what we also, the next slide is about the disaster management pathways. I think it is important that we need to change for good. This is a time, this is an opportunity. We need to maintain continual, safe, and sufficient access to quality healthcare. And that starts from home. It also starts by demanding access to quality healthcare. It also talks about ensuring that all vulnerable communities are cared for and have access to it. Initially, if you can just remember, in the first 1 month, there was a lot of talk about helping our maids, our the grocery people and everything. I think that needs to be a continual event in our life. It has to become ingrained in our societies. And then there has to be an authenticated information sharing. Sitting from where I am, I think it's looking very obvious to me that there's a lot of misinformation that is being spread around, and I think people need to be cautious, because I'm not worried if that misinformation is genuinely for community, communal violence or anything. But where I'm really concerned about is that the mythical information about COVID treatments. That's something which is very bothersome, and I think we need to be very careful about these things. We need to understand that do no harm principles are adhered to. The students may not know what these are. I would request you to just Google what is do no harm. Globally, the community also talks a lot about it. The aid community adheres by these principles, so it would be a good learning curve for you. Increase awareness and knowledge, and promote community cohesiveness and ownership and fellowships. So we need to come together as a group, community watch groups, as families, people. Just think how much time you have spent talking to your own family members during the COVID times, whether it's because of the lockdown or for any other reason. I think the inherent fact there is that we are genuinely caring about each other, and the COVID has given us that time to again start sharing that love and care. And believe me, this is not the last disaster. There will be more, and we need to be prepared. I think when the slides are shared with you, you can read this just for one time. I would like to go forward. But I think one important thing that I would like to factor or showcase here is that girls and women must be front and center in emergency responses. That's very essential. We need to not forget about our vulnerable people. The women in our house are the mainstay of our community structures. And I think there is an important need to kind of emphasize on the fact that we need to take care of them more and more as a equal citizen. I think second last slide would be that disaster management is personalized due to COVID-19. Most of my friends have not entered into the disaster management field, coming from the geography department. But I think this is a time for us to understand that COVID has brought out the inherent nature of this event is that disaster management is very personalized now. And I think I'm very happy with that, because that shows that care and caution will become an immense part of our life. The pandemic, and I seriously believe that it can be defeated only by knowledge. One of the ways is these webinars. We need to educate and act. There's a lot of remote access potential now, which is being harnessed. There are a lot of certifications. There are a lot of online courses which can be taken up by students if they're listening to this webinar. And there is an opportunity to bring in experts like Professor Menon and others to be a part of this group. And just imagine, like 3 months ago, would you have access to such kind of rich talent of knowledge? But now, because of COVID, because in the comforts of your home, because if you have access to technology, you can use all of this. So this is a time to learn further and to educate yourself. And this, believe me, will also open a lot of new pathways for you post your graduation, your post-graduation, or master's, PhD, or whatever that you're doing. It will create a lot of new pathways. And I think it's important for you to understand that. Just on the right-hand side, there is this photo of a young lady with open response and open recovery. I think there is also, this is not part of the webinar, but I just wanted to push it there, that we need to also understand that there is a lot of movement and there's a whole world of people who are working on open data sharing and how GIS and remote sensing can be used for further and further, disease mapping and ensuring information access. So before I close, I think the most important things that I would like to again harness and harp around is that we need to be humane, we need to be fit and healthy. Health is wealth more than ever before. We need to prepare for the second wave. India is still in the first wave. Cambodia has gone through the first wave. We didn't have a single case for the last 34 days. And I was very hopeful that in this webinar, I will say that Cambodia has kind of managed to, insulate itself and everything. But last night we came to know that there is a new case which has come in from Philippines. And what we need to also understand is that people are also emerging out of the shadows. I mean, there are very great unsung medical heroes who are actually in the forefront of analyzing and administering these tests. As Menon sir said, test, and more tests. I think a classic example is what happened in Cambodia last evening. Was a person came in from Philippines, completely unsymptomatic, has a COVID-free certificate from the Philippines medical authority. He had COVID and they had to quarantine 69 other passengers in that same flight. So I think this fight is not over yet. There will be multiple waves. We are hearing about, Suslan in China. I'm not very good with those names, but there is a second wave that's happening there already. So I think we need to be very clear. Of course, if you go to the WhatsApp University, there's always talk about a second wave coming in Spain or wherever it was. I think there's some sense of, factual information there which we can think about. But I think what's important is to see, act, and then think about it and learn to live with COVID. I think it's important that we need to accept this fact and we need to adapt for the future. Before I close, I think it's important for us to, reinvest in the process of United Nations. And no matter what others say about WHO and others, I believe that there is a need for a global coordination system which actually helps information sharing. And I think before I close, it's important to understand that we read this again and again, keep it on your screen for some time, that we are in this together and we'll get through this together. Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you, Menon sir, and thank you for everybody for listening to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dipankar. I think we can open the session for questions. For both of you will be taking questions. I think in the chat box, there are so many questions already been posted.
Okay.
Dr. Jyotirmay, how much time do we have? Because it's already past 11:30.
No problem, sir. Half an hour more. We can clear all the questions, doubts.
Okay. May I suggest that we could actually have brief questions from people. They could actually just sort of unmute their phones and then start asking questions. And maybe you could coordinate that, Dr. Jyotirmay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure, I'll do that. So if they are raising their hands, they can one by one, I can unmute them and they can start asking the question. Participants, now it is open for discussion. You can one by one unmute yourself and ask the questions.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Myself, Sandeep Kulkarni from Mumbai. I would like to ask a question. I mean, anyone, it could be Dipankar sir or Menon sir. I read in a newspaper that it is difficult to keep an account of migrant workers since they are from the unorganized sector, and it's very difficult to track them, like where they stay or where they work or how much they earn or etc. etc. And then in what they're facing, it's pathetic, and it should not be. Such situation should not be for anyone, and they are not able to go to their place where they are safe or where they are not able to get food. Can there be good kind of system in future, at least, where we can have a record of all these people and then make them a good, make them good life for them?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Sandeep. Actually, we have now technology available which can actually use big data analytics, and you can also have artificial intelligence algorithms which can actually do tracking of those people. If you can actually have a comprehensive database, because the numbers are very, very huge, but at the same time, we have an institution called the Central Labour Commissioner, CLC, in the Ministry of Labour in Government of India. And the Central Labour Commissioner also has counterparts in every state. There is a Labour Commissioner in every state government. And so there was an RTI question which asked, about the data for the migrant workers. And the Central Labour Commissioner said they do not have any data. And so he asked for all the Labour Commissioners in all the state governments to give the answer within 3 days. And this was in April. And we don't have the answers from many states because, they do not have a comprehensive database. So now every district has got a district labor officer who should actually be having information. And we know that, just to give you an idea, we have 35 lakh people, 3.5 million people in Kerala who are interstate migrant workers, and they're called guest workers, in Kerala, 35 lakh people. And Bihar has 22 lakh people who are outside Bihar, who are working in other states, including taxi drivers in Mumbai and also in Delhi. And in many other parts of the country, there are people working from Bihar, 22 lakh people. We have 18 lakh people from Assam, and we have 13 lakh people from Jharkhand. So we have some numbers, but then, we need to disaggregate that by age, sex, skill, sets of these people, and then also find out where they are actually at the districts, where they are located. We need to have a system which need to register. I'm sure that this will now come up because there is going to be a divide between a major demographic shift which is going to happen in terms of the labor. Migrant workers are actually going to be deciding whether they need to go back to the whatever was called the host state, to the states where they were working. Many people have decided not to go back, which means that there is going to be a pressure on the home states to provide alternative employment opportunities. So this is actually going to be a challenge. I'm sure this is doable, and civil society organizations are helping. Sorry.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm Raj. Hello.
Deepanka, please feel free to add.
Hello.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Hi, I'm Raj Mehta from Mumbai. I want to ask Dr. Dipankar that what do you think, according to your study, that the strategies applied by the Cambodian government and the Indian government, they are different in which terms?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, if I heard the question correctly, it was about the differences between the Cambodian approach and the Indian approach. I think for me, having been here for 2.5 years, the important understanding is that there is already a very high sense of public health behavior in the communities. So because they have been through SARS, they have been through MERS and swine flu and H1N1 before, there is a general sense of health and hygiene which is much more advanced than our systems. So you would see people on a normal basis wearing masks with pollution and other things. I think if I'm not being very open about it, there is also a sense of understanding within the community that their expectation from the government is pretty low, unlike us. So we need to take pride in that fact that there is a lot of expectation of Indians from their elected representatives, which is a very positive thing as part of a democratic system. But what we also need to understand is that somewhere in that transactional process of expectation, we tend to lose track of the fact that we ourselves are also responsible for our own behavior and our own health and hygiene. So I think that's where I see a stark difference between the way communities have behaved in India as well as in Cambodia. So in Cambodia, people are genuinely concerned about themselves, about their health, because their systems are poor. They don't have much of money with them. So they need to be cautious and they believe in prevention. Whereas on our side, we are more concerned about what has the government done. There is minimal behavioral change that is evident in us, given a big pandemic like COVID. Over.
Thank you, sir.
Participants, those who have questions, only unmute your mic. Others, please go on mute mode.
Hello.
Yes. Yes, sir, you can go ahead. Ask.
Madam, myself Kishore Shinde from Latur.
Yes, sir, you
Hello.
can ask the question. Yes, you are audible. You can ask question.
My question for to Memon sir. After COVID lockdown, what will be the effect on social life of the society?
Yeah, Mr. Kishore Shinde, this is actually a very good question. In fact, the social life is going to be changing because the concept which we used to have earlier in terms of free mixing of people, open socializing, large parties, large weddings with thousands of people attending and all that, I think there is going to be some kind of culture shock. And many things which we have taken for granted are going to change because, you find that we do not know. People are going to look at each other with a lot of mistrust. And as Dr. Dipanga mentioned, there is going to be, a major introspection and reflection which all of us will have to go through. How far can we trust each other? And can we look at a person without looking at that person with, suspicion and with skepticism and stigma? Can a person who is actually coming from other, infected areas, these terms like sealed area, containment area, buffer zones, and these color codes like red zones and orange zones and green zones have very little meaning because COVID-19 does not respect boundaries and color codes. Okay, we need to understand that you might be in a green zone, but then, if you're actually traveling into an area which is a red zone, you might have a problem. And now that your domestic travel is also allowed, you might also have a problem where, a person sitting next to you, when you don't have a middle seat which is empty, you do not know whether that person, you can actually look at that person with trust and with confidence. Everybody is going to be looking at, physical distancing and stay away from people, from each other. And even within extended families, we are seeing this. People are not willing to accept even relatives, into houses because they say that, you are there, from an affected area and you are from a containment zone or a sealed area, you're coming into an area which is safe. Even residential societies, gated communities, you find people looking at each other with suspicion. Even watchmen, security guards are stopping maidservants coming in. So I think it's going to change the way in which society will start looking at relationships. We have a lot of people who are probably infected. We do not know, the vegetable vendors, and we are looking at everybody with stigma. We are also assigning a certain community to be seen with suspicion because of what was mentioned as the Jamati get-togethers which happened in several parts of the country. And even Tamil Nadu, you're there in Chennai, we have a lot of people from Chennai and Coimbatore. Chennai, Salem, Coimbatore, Madurai, they sealed those cities and they said that, these cities were all closed down, they were all locked down. But, you have to understand that it is not a vegetable, market which actually can become vulnerable. You can actually have many, many pockets which can actually create that problem. So we need to look at each other with a new culture which respects humanity. And Dr. Dipanga mentioned, be humane. I think that is one of the biggest messages which this COVID-19 has allowed all of us to introspect and reflect and understand the humanity within each one of us. temples and mosques and churches and gurudwaras, the way they reached out and provided food, unknown people, providing food and water and providing footwear to the migrant workers. And at the same time, you also saw exploitation. People collecting thousands of rupees from migrant workers for taking them. So empty trucks were collecting people, and people were being taken as, like sheep in containers, without any access to even ventilation. So these are, I think, questions which will actually make us all to wonder and reflect. Dr. Dipankar, please add.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
No, I think this is fine, sir. You have given the right explanation, sir. You just have to be a little more humane, sir. That's all we can expect.
And I would like to also appreciate religion and faith as something which is a unifier. Churches, temples, gurudwaras and mosques, and using the imams and bishops and reverend sisters and priests to be talking to communities and creating confidence in them, to look at each person as an individual, as a human being, without, religion dividing people. I think that should be also a message from COVID-19.
Yes, sir. Sure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next question. Anybody else want to clarify their doubt?
There have been several interesting comments and questions which have come into the chat box, and so because of the time factor, we may not be able to respond to each question. But then, I've seen the questions from Mr. Arvind, from Dr. Nebita Majaret, Dr. Miri, and many important questions have come up. How we could have done things differently. I think this is the question which all of us need to respond and reflect. As academics, as practitioners, as professionals, I think we need to also understand that this is something where we need to have inclusive, multi-stakeholder engagement. We need to be more participatory, more consultative, and must look at the humanity of the people, migrant workers, the people who were tested positive. We saw that actually in certain places of the country, we had tin sheets put up in front of houses saying that this is a COVID-19 patient, and the society boycotted them. And many people were asked to vacate the houses, leave. Many doctors and nurses were asked to leave. And I think this is something which is terrible. Doctors being chased, doctors being victimized, doctors being harassed. And I think throwing petals, from the air and things like that is not going to be the solution. We need to have a better humanity. And I would request academics, practitioners to write blogs, write in newspapers, write in social media, and use WhatsApp as a tool to spread good stories and not fake news. And please don't forward fake news. And do, this kind of fact checks for the kind of things which we are receiving before we send any forwards.
Yes, sir. I think there was also a question from Mr. Rengan about African communities, African countries using traditional homeopathy system to cure coronavirus, but WHO not actually accepting these, kind of ideas. My feedback to that is that yes, definitely traditional health medicine is an important, virtuous area where we need to, kind of work on. And I think one clear realization, at least for us as Indians, is that we have all started using turmeric more and more. We have started drinking hot water. We have started washing our hands. We have started to keep our shoes outside the home. I think those things traditionally our own have kind of been, kind of sent out over a period of time, and they are all coming back.
Hello.
So I think yeah. So I think what we need to also understand is that traditional health medicine has its own important areas, and I think it's also very important for us to understand that those have effectiveness. But I think it's also important that given the system that we work in, there has to be a due process of certification by which these really good, techniques and homeopathic norms can be brought out to the larger public. Of course, the system needs to be a little more, streamlined so that traditional health practitioners have access and are able to utilize these services and certifications, because the medical world and the arena of medicine is monopolized or colonized by large corporates. So I think there is a need for the governments to make the system more accessible for the simple health workers and traditional health practitioners so that these techniques come out. But I think it's also important for me as an understanding is that I've started listening to more to our elders and parents. There's a world of knowledge that we have had in our traditional practices, which we over a period of time have lost. And I think COVID is a good opportunity for all of us to bring back those traditional ways of healthy living and sustainable development that we have kind of missed out. Over.
Any more questions? Participants, is there any other questions?
Even though we have a lot of doubts about the testing kits and the testing processes, we would still need to be understanding that we need to probably carry out more and more tests, and there have been many approved testing processes which have been identified, and even I think strip of paper which actually changes the color codes and things so that when blood tests are being done has also been approved by ICMR. So I think we may have to look at more and more tests to see whether people are actually going to be COVID-19 positive, because there could be false negatives and false positives, but at the same time, if you are able to identify more people who are likely to be COVID-19 positive, then we would actually be able to contain this disease outbreak. And this is extremely important in slums, urban areas where large numbers of people stay together in crowded houses and settlements. You may have difficulty in terms of following social distancing and physical distancing, but at the same time, the word social distancing itself is also stigmatizing, because social distancing means basically that you look at a person who is a COVID-19 person to be somebody who you should keep a social distance, but it's not social distance; it's more physical distancing. Because in the earlier days, we used to have social distancing seen as something where you actually look at a person who is polluted, who is untouchables, and water, even safe drinking water, was not even being allowed to be taken by people who are untouchables or who were treated as untouchables. So these are all part of that social stigma which was associated with caste and religion and so on. So I think we need to change that, and physical distancing should be the term which we should be using to and not social distancing, because social distancing, we saw people being thrown food, which I think was extremely inhuman. You saw people being crowded together in closed shutters, and food was being thrown at them, and that kind of system is actually extremely inhuman, and we should actually show more respect and respect the dignity of human beings. I think that's very important.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir,
hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. You can
Hi,
ask.
good morning. This is Premita Gopakumar.
Yes.
I have a query. Recently we have seen in news saying that our National Human Rights Commission, India, have taken 5 cases against 2-3 instances. Like there was a picture came out where there was a migrant mother pulling a suitcase and a child lying over the suitcase and sleeping. And then another case in Bihar where policemen were beating up the migrant workers. So we have read in newspapers saying that NHR, Human Rights Commission of India, have filed cases against this. So my query is like, why are we waiting for our human rights institutions are waiting for such sensational photos or news to come up to take action? I think migrant workers have been, the issue with these migrant workers walking along so many thousands of kilometers. It has started since I think 2-3 months now, since the lockdown has started. But why our human rights institutions like waiting so much to take initiative? Why are they waiting for such a sensational issues or news to come up? Why don't we try to respond as early?
That's a very interesting question, Pramita. Actually, we find that most institutions are playing safe. Most institutions are not willing to accept and recognize. Earlier Supreme Court even used to take a suo motu recognition. Even with an England letter, the Chief Justice in the Supreme Court used to recognize and then even respond. However, now we find that everybody is being very cautious. There is an institutional fear in most institutions, a fear of not wanting to step in. I think that is wrong. In fact, we find that actually in the Supreme Court there was this question about migrant workers, which the Supreme Court did not recognize, and they dismissed that case, saying that there was not enough information. But however, there were many high courts which opened up and said that we cannot refuse, and we need to recognize that the migrant workers issue is a serious issue, and they have given the government. The state governments are asked to step in and respond. So I think that we need to have good conscientious officers, and the judiciary, the executive, the legislature, and the media. They all have to play that role. Unfortunately, we are all seeing that most of the institutions are not really performing the roles which they should be performing. And that is actually a comment on the and, academics, civil society representatives, and development practitioners. They all have a role to make sure that people are made accountable.
Sir, you can unmute your mic, sir. I have muted all since the participants are not listening.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so, if there are no more questions, we can actually respond to some of the questions there.
Thank you, sir.
We can send a response by email to Dr. Jyotirmai, and then she could communicate that with the questions. You can save the questions that have come up in the chat box, and then you can mail it to Dr. Dipankar and also to me, and then we will respond.
Sure, sir. I'll do that. Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. Now I want to request TV, sir. Sir, are you there? Vasant Kumaran, sir. Sir, are you there, sir?
Not sure if TV sir heard you.
I don't know whether he has gone. Hello, sir. Are you there, sir? I think. No, I think he is not available. Okay, any other questions, participants? Any more questions?
Good morning.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
I'm Harini.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Harini, you can go ahead. You can ask your question.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
Sir, I'm Harini from Tamil Nadu. Will this difficult situation continue for a long time?
Actually, we are not sure how long this is going to continue. There is a speculation that this may actually slowly, peter out, but then there could be repeated waves which may happen. There have been some reports which say that we need to wait till 2021. One study said we may even have to wait till 2022. But the vaccine, they say that it takes normally about 12 to 18 months for the vaccine to be invented, because it goes through a series of testing. First, it's tested on animals, then it is tested on human beings, and there have been some attempts in trying to test it on some human beings in the UK and also in Africa. And unfortunately, the victims, the people who volunteered, suffered fatal deaths because the testing of the vaccine. So I think these are some of the risks involved that you need to do the process of testing the vaccine. And there is an element of trying to find they can actually get this vaccine invented by collaborations between countries. Maharashtra, there is this Serum Institute which is working with Oxford University, and they feel that they will be able to come out with the vaccine in the next few months. They're very optimistic that they may be able to find some solutions by early vaccine by September, October. But we are not sure. We will need to wait for some time, and there could be even a threat of this emerging during the monsoon and also during the winter months. We have to be very careful. So, as I said earlier, we need to strengthen our own immunities, and everybody needs to invest in trying to develop immunities, exercises, and also proper, including meditation and pranayama and other things, yoga, practice of improving one's own adaptive capacities. I think that is very important.
Thank you,
Dr.
sir.
Dipankar, anything else to be added? Please go ahead.
Yeah, sir, I think there is this growing sense of understanding that COVID will remain in various strains, whether it's the L strain, S strain, or whatever. But I think it will be just like H1N1 or like swine flu and other cases. So there are pockets of cases which do arise in different parts of Africa, in East Asia, and other places. But largely, the understanding is that the governments and the medical science will take over a period of time. Of course, we need to also be mindful that, as you said, that in terms of certification of human-ready drugs, there has to be a due process that has to be followed. I think we need to be a bit cautious of fast-tracking these efforts in the name of trying to save people, because they could have far-reaching side effects, which take usually a long time to kind of manifest. So what's important is to not lose sight of the fact that we have to deal with COVID. We have to fight COVID, but we have to fight COVID with drugs which are going through a systematic and a due process of certification, which means that they have to go through a process which has been fine-tuned over a long period of time. So just to be in a panic mode and kind of taking any drug that and then kind of making it available for mass testing and mass propagation would not.
Dipankar, you can unmute your mic. I have muted all.
Okay, no, I think that's all I wanted to say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think Nitya Subhashini wants to ask something. You can ask now.
Hello, sir. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, you are audible. You can ask.
Sir, how far is it going to be difficult for us in the post-pandemic? Because Western countries have adapted systems like face-by-face relaxation. On account of a very small population, it might be easy for them to implement it. But given in a vast population with diverse features, demographic features, how is it difficult for us to face the post-pandemic, and how are we going to face this post-lockdown situation? Hello, sir.
Hello, Dipankar. You unmute your mic. Sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. You are audible. You can.
Yes. You had also mentioned about this bubble concept in New Zealand and also the herd immunity in Sweden and in many other European countries, Scandinavian countries.
Yes, sir.
They feel that actually because the population should actually develop their own immunity to these kind of COVID-19 threats. And they feel that actually 60%, this may spread in about 60% of the cases of the population. In smaller countries, with smaller populations, these are manageable. But whereas in our country, with the kind of population density which we have in urban areas, this is going to be a challenge. And recovering from this is going to be something where we need to find our own ways of ensuring safety and individual safety, and also safety of elderly people within the families, in the households, then pregnant ladies, and as the categories which Dr. Dipankar mentioned, we need to be very careful. The people who have had organ transplants, people who are palliative care patients, people who are going through kidney dialysis, and many other terminally ill diseases, and also people with physical disabilities or even mental challenges, the people with diseases like autism and various other diseases which actually need special care. People, including the caregivers and also the people who are in these categories, would need to be provided a lot of support. And I think in the urban areas and the slums, we may really have major challenges because of the crowding in of people. So I think we need to start looking at our own coping capacities, our own coping mechanisms, and individuals. We need to look at children, elderly people, palliative care patients, and people with disabilities, and others with a special attention.
Okay, so thank you for the response.
Just one more thing, sir. Just wanted to add on that, on face recognition and other things. We need to also understand that we need technology to be subservient to us rather than the other way around. I think there is this growing tendency to assume that technology can be the one-all solution for everything. So whether we want to see people having barcoded systems and then Aadhaar cards for everybody. So these things look fancy and they look very good. Obviously we are moving towards that agenda of having a migrant system where all the migrants are on the grid and everything, which is very, very desirable in some ways. But it also means, leads to that understanding that we need to understand that we are not a South Korea, or we are not China, on two different terms, like South Korea being democratic and China being very, obsessed with power and then ensuring that they are able to use the technology that they want to. But we need to understand that India fits somewhere in between. We have a growing populace which is getting technology induced and which is able to use technology in a much better manner. But we also need to be cognizant of the fact that it will take some time for the larger Indian populace to be on the grid and also understand technology as we want them to understand. I mean, like, my father doesn't use WhatsApp at all. So I think we need to understand that technology is not easy to come by, and it's we cannot use the pandemic to be a reason to push people into a technology driven revolution. That won't happen, and it will only create other kind of mal manifestations that we don't have any kind of clear idea about. So technology, yes, community mapping, facial recognition, thermal scanning, those things can be used, but on a personal level, I think we are still quite far from that time.
Hope your question is answered, Nitya. Sir,
Yes,
do you want to add something, sir? You can go ahead.
Actually, I think, for those of you who are in the field of education, academics will have to start getting used to using technology to get pools of expertise from different countries around the world and understand good practices in your own disciplines. I think that is going to be, a new opportunity, which we saw that webinars are becoming more frequent. In fact, in many universities, now classes are going to be conducted with webinars, and then there is going to be a lot of exposure to professionals who are able to reach out to a larger number of people. And I think the working styles are going to be changing. People will be working from home and being much more productive. In fact, actually, some of the IT companies have been telling us that creating a database of migrant workers earlier, if it had taken probably, 6 months for this entire database for the country, with, maybe 60 crores of people who are working in the informal sector, or maybe even 90 crores of people, 85% of the entire labor force in the informal unorganized sector, and about 387 million, 38.7 million people who are migrant workers. I think now the number has come to about 60 crores. In one of the assessments, Dr. Subbarao, the former governor of the Reserve Bank of India, mentioned 60 crore people who are interstate migrant workers. So to get the database of 60 crore people, earlier it would have taken probably 6 months, but now I understand from discussions with many IT companies that if you're able to divide this into state-wise and then district-wise and so on, working with people who are able to work from home, we might actually be able to complete this entire process over a few weeks. So we are able to collapse time, and we are able to do what is called crowdsourcing of information. And this, I think, is something which is an added benefit which is possible. Working together, there will be a lot of co-benefits in working together across countries, across continents, and sharing the expertise of people. I think that this is a new opportunity which COVID-19 has actually brought out, and I think we need to make the best use of that.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? I saw Abhishek raising his hand.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi. Hello.
Who is this? Introduce
Yeah,
yourself
I'm
and you
Dr.
can ask the question.
Good morning, all. I'm Dr. Sharath from Alleppey district.
Okay. You can ask the question. You are audible.
Yeah. Currently, I'm working in COVID control cell, and my question is about the preparedness of natural calamities in the context of COVID-19. So, just like 2 years back, when we had a flood, we had to displace or we have to evacuate actually more than 2 lakhs of people to relief camps. And just a few minutes before, Vinod sir was telling about the importance of physical distancing, and how is it possible to maintain adequate physical distance in these relief camps is a very big question actually. Can you add, sir?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sharath. Thank you very much for this question. In fact, in 2018, August 2018, the Kerala floods actually saw more than 14 lakh people being evacuated into several relief camps in different districts of the country, of the state. And in Cyclone Phylin in 2013 in Orissa, more than 1 million people were evacuated. And this is actually, Cyclone Phylin was actually of the same intensity as the super cyclone in 1999. But then 99 super cyclone, we lost about 10,000 people in Odisha. But Cyclone Phylin, because 1 million people were evacuated, 10 lakh people were evacuated, there were only 23 deaths. And so this, I think, provided an opportunity to look at evacuation of people. And this time also, when Cyclone Amphan came, we saw that Odisha evacuated about several lakhs of people. 3 lakh people were evacuated there, and West Bengal evacuated more than 2 lakh people. But we find that actually, in the case of COVID-19, there was this, suspicion. Many people did not want to go into the relief camps because of the COVID-19, because they were not sure whether they would actually be exposing themselves to the risk of infection. So, and right now, the only state which has actually prepared a social distancing or a physical distancing guideline for the floods in the relief camps is Assam. And I would recommend that you take a look at that guideline which is prepared. And that talked about 5 square meters for every person in the relief camp. Earlier in the relief camps, it is 1 square meter per person, and which means almost literally standing space. But now they're talking about 5 square meters. But this is not possible in many places to have a 5 square meter per person for physical distancing because of the COVID-19 issue. When the floods are coming, we need to be more careful. But this is going to pose challenges, and this is actually seen in West Bengal and also in Odisha during this cyclone. When people were in the relief camps, there was not enough space. And we saw during the time when the trains were moving from some of the places, we find the railway station, the number of people who are in the railway station, and the people in the migrants who are working or moving across states in trucks, you find that there were more than 30-40 people in the trucks, and sometimes even 60 people in the truck. There is no possibility of physical distancing in such situations. So we have to be aware of the fact that there will be challenges, but we will have to all try and remain safe as much as possible.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you for the response.
Just one point I wanted to add on this, sir. As you said, like test, and more tests. I think it's important to understand that we don't lose sight of the main agenda. The agenda is not to, streamline transportation systems so that people don't transmit or, end up the day get, the COVID contagion. The whole idea is that wherever you are, you stay safe and you are, tested again and again. And if you fall sick, then you are treated. Transportation is just a facility which not everybody would be exercising. So if we focus a lot on airlines, on railways and buses, I think we lose sight of the main agenda. The main agenda is that the ecosystem where you are in, or at your home or at your workplace, you are safe. And then not everybody is traveling actually. So, in a people, number of 100 people, less than 10 to 15% would actually be traveling. And these are transient populations. So in a country of 130 crores, there's never a time where more than 20 crore people are traveling in a single day. That is a huge number, to be honest. Like, even if it is 10 crores, I think we need to be clear that there are 120 people, 20 crore people who are at home who need to be safeguarded against COVID, because it's going to affect everybody in some ways or the other. So transportation and these things actually sell better. They make bigger media headlines. So I think that's where there is a lot of concern.
Yes. Any other questions, please? Participants? I hope we have done with the question session. So can we wind up, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
I would like to thank all of you and also thank all the participants for taking time to interact and also send a few questions in the chat box, and then we will try and see whether we will be able to get these questions, and then also the email address of all the participants are available with Dr. Jyotirmay. Then we could actually have these questions shared, and then we will send the response to you in the next 24 hours or 48 hours, and then we could kindly circulate that with everybody.
Yes, sir. Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us, sir.
And stay safe.
Yes, sir. That is more important.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Menon sir, for kind of accepting to be on this webinar. This is the first webinar, and I'm I'm really grateful to you because you accepted it immediately. There was not even a moment of doubt or anything. So I'm very grateful to you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please count on us anytime, whenever you require, and we'll be very happy to provide all the support and assistance. Thank
Yes,
you
sir.
very much.
I would also like to thank you on behalf of Nirmala College for Women, Department of Geography, and for accepting our request, sir. Readily you have accepted. Like this is my first venture on online platform.
Thank you very
So
much. All the
you
best.
have contributed a lot to me, my venture. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. And if
Thank
you
you,
have any specific topics which you would like to have sessions on, we'll be very happy to also provide you contacts of, professionals and experts.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Disaster
Sure, sir.
management, and also in, in specific fields in geography.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
be able to provide you also.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Surely I'll contact you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining
Have a
us.
nice day. Have a nice weekend.
Thank
Bye.
you, sir. Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Take
you.
care, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam.
Yes.
Thank you.
Dipankar, I would like to share my extreme happiness and gratefulness to you because you only made this happen. Thank you very much for supporting me in all the ways. So I hope we can associate for further programs. I hope we will have a series of programs like this. So I request your cooperation. And all the participants, once again, thanks for joining us. All your queries and questions can be answered. You can mail to me. And you will receive your certificates within 1 week if you have filled in that feedback form. Thank you once again. Thank you for joining
Thank you.
us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Stay safe.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Thank you. You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Dr. Jyotirmayi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much
Well,
for organizing an amazing class.
Very useful, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
yes, you're welcome. Welcome.